Welcome to the virtual lunch. Today is Friday, August 11th. This is virtual lunch number 856. Our guest today is Adam Severson, the Chief Marketing and Business Development Officer at Baker Donelson. And this is part of our series on fueling firm growth with UniCourt. Hi, Adam. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Ari?
I'm really well. I love doing this. I love these Fridays. I'm so honored that you've joined us today, and I really appreciate it. I like to give the guest a chance to get to know who the audience is and like who the participants are. So if you wouldn't mind, I would like to just give a chance for the folks just to give a quick introduction, tell you who they are. I'll start with Jeff.
Hey, Adam. Jeff Cox, Director of Content at UniCourt.
Awesome. Nancy, you know, but I want everyone else to get to know Nancy. So Nancy?
Nancy Merland, and I'm Marketing and Business Development Advisor, and I specialize in content, social and digital media, meaning these days, lots of LinkedIn training, podcasts, and Zoom and virtual presentation coaching.
Joel Weber.
Hi, Adam. I'm Joel Weber. I practice corporate and commercial law in the Chicago area.
Joe Scott.
Hi, Adam. Joe Scott. Great to meet you. I'm an attorney by trade, but the last several years I've been doing consulting for law firms and legal technology companies.
Scott
Jassy. I'm the Director of Finance and Administration for Cohen, Clare, Lands, Greifer, and Simpson. We're a preeminent matrimonial firm in New York and probably in the country. We're one of the largest firms that practices only matrimonial. And I've been in this position and similar positions for more than 25 years.
Frankie.
Hi. Hey, Adam. It's been a while. Adam and I knew each other in Nashville when I lived there before New York. So like 6 years ago, I guess. But I am based in Charleston now, and I'm the Senior Director of Client Advisory at Sandline. And I used to be a regular Ari Legal Tech Mafia member. And then I saw you were speaking today, and I was like, well, I should join. I don't have anything going on at lunchtime. So here I am.
Well,
excited to connect with y'all again.
Caroline.
Hey, I am the Marketing Technology Manager at Baker Donelson. I am a member of Adam's team.
Ann Gore.
Hi, I'm Ann Gore. Put me on the spot. I'm Ann Gore. I'm a legal technology consultant and information governance strategist, and I work with the small to mid-market corporate legal and law firm clients in helping them get their technology and information governance projects over the fence.
Jason.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Plank. I'm the digital marketing strategist at Baker Donelson, and I am on Adam's team.
Brooke.
Hey guys, I'm Brooke Reynolds. I am Business Development Coordinator at Baker Donelson. I am also part of Adam's team.
Teresa.
Teresa Milby, Business Development Coordinator on Adam's team.
Hi, Mallory Hopkins. I am a proposal specialist at Baker Donelson, also on Adam's team.
Is it Eamon? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah, it's Eamon. I work at Neotologic, and I just was scouring on LinkedIn, and I saw this for legal tech, and I thought it'd be interesting to be a part of.
Welcome. That's awesome. Okay, Adam, I would love for you to tell us about your background and your work at Baker Donelson.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I've been in the legal business my entire career. I started with West Publishing years ago as a customer service rep. So I was in a cube farm in Eagan, Minnesota, fielding calls from mostly frustrated customers and lawyers that were upset about maybe how much their Black's Law dictionary cost or their Westlaw charges and things like that. And quickly had a great interest in the law and sort of all things legal, and moved pretty quickly out of that role into a sales role and moved to Los Angeles in my early 20s. And there I was literally turning doorknobs and meeting with law firms and lawyers and trying to convince them that the internet was going to be a thing and that they could use it successfully to help them do legal research and also market their practices. That experience, gave me a lot of insight into the mindset of lawyers, how they think, how they solve problems. And, you can't really sell the bankruptcy practice guide if you don't know a little bit about bankruptcy. And so really had to cut my teeth and know that you needed to really understand more than just the difference between a Chapter 7 and Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Because if you were going to be doing Boolean searches to sell your product, you better understand the key number system and all the aspects of the law. And so, I joke sometimes that experience really helped me kind of learn, like learn enough to be dangerous as it relates to the law. And then, sort of went back to West Group at the time, then Thomson West, and now Thomson Reuters. But was in a sales training capacity for them for a while, and then picked up a different role when they acquired a company called Fine Law, and was doing then sales to the large law firm market. Goodness, so many years ago. But really was on an airplane every week and meeting with managing partners and chief marketing officers and practice group leaders, as well as in-house counsel, which was really interesting because we were developing an audience of corporate counsel and trying to bridge the gap of what clients wanted and what law firms were trying to deliver. And so in that sales role, I got a lot of insight about what clients want. And then after a while, one of my clients brought me in to be the director of business development, which sort of brought me as an in-house marketing and business development professional about maybe 19 or so years ago. That was at Dorsey and Whitney, was there for about 6 years, and then was at Faegre and Benson as their head of marketing and business development for a few years, and then moved to Nashville, Tennessee 12 years ago to join the ranks of Baker Donelson.
One of the things that I find super interesting about this is you said early in your career, you served as a sales director, a sales executive for Thomson. You were selling marketing and business development products to the large firms. How did that experience set the foundation for your career as a marketing and business development leader?
Sure. Well, I think in any executive role, you need to be a strong communicator. You need to do your homework and you need to be prepared. And so when I would go to these firms, I would need to understand what they were all about, what practices made them tick, who I was meeting with, what their backgrounds were, any elements of commonality that I might be able to have with them. I also learned that you had to be adaptable. Lots of curveballs over the course of my career, both in selling and otherwise. You need to be patient, sometimes. And I think you need to sort of have a good bit of resilience. And so I think each of those elements that sort of leads you to have a strong pipeline of opportunities to then close business to, sort of ring the bell, if you will, is all the same stuff I'm doing now, but the sort of different lenses that I'm working with our firm leaders and our lawyers to try to drive growth and ensure that we've got a satisfied client base that wants to continue to use our firm over and over again.
At the time that you were selling into this segment, were you thinking someday I want to be the chief marketing and business development officer at such a prestigious firm? Like, was that on your mind?
I think what was probably more on my mind was like, if I can close this deal, I can go on a hell of a vacation, but I think, as I contemplated a move, away from the sales role and into a law firm, at the time, they brought me in as the director of business development. I was one of 4 guys in the country that was doing business development and sort of sales and meeting with clients as a business professional that was not a legal practitioner. And so that was rare. And so I did contemplate then, okay, if this is like a starting thing, maybe someday I could do that and do it well. And if it works out, maybe be a leader and do something cool. And I knew I was a pretty decent salesperson. And so if I flamed out and they thought I sucked, I could probably go find a job and sell, ketchup popsicles to people wearing white gloves.
Isn't that funny? I often find this super funny that sales is sort of that core skill where no matter what, you could sell something. I think lawyers don't necessarily have that, right? They think their skill is being a lawyer. They don't always realize that their skill is actually in selling their ability to be a lawyer.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think lawyers are incredible salespeople. I just think they don't want to be called salespeople. I think that fundamentally the skill set that you have to be an incredible practitioner are exactly the same skills that you would want and need to have to be a great closer. And so if you think about somebody who's going to, make an argument in front of the Supreme Court, they're going to prepare. They're actually going to probably stand in front of a mirror and be what are the words that are going to come out of your mouth? So that kind of preparation and instinct and desire to sort of be your best is exactly the kind of thing that would make somebody a good salesperson. I think one of the the nuances that's different, Ari, in selling and client development is that the questions that you ask in a client conversation are typically questions that you might not know the answer to. And so that is necessary to learn more about your client's business and their goals and how they're driven, sometimes even how like the general counsel is compensated, for example. But that gray area is uncomfortable for lawyers because they typically look to ask questions. They typically look to ask questions that they know the answer to, right? Because they're asking leading questions. And in the client development context, you really need to sort of ask more open-ended questions, and then you need to sort of guide that client down the path that can hopefully lead towards a buying conversation.
Wow, I haven't heard it characterized. That's a great point. Has the way that large firms approach marketing and business development changed over the past couple of decades since you started as a sales executive selling marketing and business development products?
Absolutely. I joke that back in the day, the marketing strategy for a lot of firms was to make sure that the phone lines worked. And, they would sort of pick up the phone because there was if you think about the demand curve, there was an exceeding amount of demand. And so firms literally just like had to be open. And it was a function of, how well situated they were. I think the way that the competitive landscape, both for competition for talent, within law firms, as well as consolidation in the marketplace amongst our own clients, has really driven to, as everybody's trying to get a piece of the pie, that pie is generally still larger than it was, much, much larger, but clients are getting a lot more sophisticated in how they procure legal services too.
Like, can we shift gears for a second? You have obviously, you don't need to guess, you have a number of talented folks who are on this discussion with you. So you have a sophisticated marketing and business development team and department. How do you use data and law firm intelligence in your marketing?
Yeah, I mean, so many ways, really. Essentially, client intelligence and data really just helps us be smarter about the clients that we're serving and smarter about ourselves. We use a host of different data sources. We've got some incredibly talented people on my team that help us cull that data to make it be much more actionable intelligence. I think one example, Ari, that I'm both proud of, but also I think speaks to the evolution of the function is, something that we've developed and called client metrics reports. And so, we look at the client team, the makeup of that team, the diversity of that team, both statistically as well as sort of usage, right? So like the number of hours that an individual is billing on file for a client. That's the kind of information that clients want. They want to understand the diversity makeup of your team. From there, that one report also includes trends from a revenue perspective, as well as the number of matters. It also incorporates then a gap analysis, or sort of some firms would call that practice group penetration. And so how are we servicing them in a given practice? What's that year over year trend then? Is that particular area of law increasing or decreasing? What are the number of matters that exist within that? I always like to say that the legal business is episodic and derivative. And so we are sort of at the mercy of the marketplace. And so I can't determine if a client's going to have, 37 lawsuits in a given year. But if they do, we hope to get a piece of that action. And so, I do think that like looking at matters in a report like that is incredibly important. We've got other elements that are folded into that, like business hygiene and profitability, as well as then the revenue generating activities that our lawyers are employing for that given client. And so that report, I think, I believe based on discussions with my peers, is pretty rare in the marketplace. And it's the kind of thing that we proactively share with our lawyers every single month. And then we have a conversation about it. And that data helps drive activity for that client conversation, where we're hyper focused on what that client needs, as compared to sort of like, I read in the Wall Street Journal that there might be an economic crisis. Well, I've learned real quick that depending on who you ask, one person's economic crisis is another person's economic boom. And so really trying to understand how that client is situated and how we're hopefully delighting them with client service that really is a way where they just want to, keep coming back for more and be introduced to new colleagues and the like. And so one thing that I think also is fascinating to me, and probably maybe the not such a flattering way for other law firms, is that a lot of firms don't even share data with their own lawyers or their own business services professionals. And so one of the, I think, unique dynamics of Baker Donelson is that we're very transparent, both generally with communication and how we lead, but also with data. And so if you don't understand how the money works and how it's flowing for a given client or practice group or the firm generally, it's going to be really difficult to be a really strong business development professional because you don't know if like what you're doing is working. And so I think that I'm proud of the fact that we've got a firm that's willing to share that information, and then really trying to use that information then to get even closer to our clients.
You mentioned a little bit about how you're using data and the ability to enhance client service. You use the word delight, which I thought was super interesting. I've only heard one other company use that, and it's a service provider, not a law firm, although in legal, and one of their mission statements is, delight the client, et cetera. So how does it give you a competitive advantage? Because you mentioned not to talk about other firms, but I mean, do you get a sense that it gives you this competitive advantage because are firms not using it because it's too confusing? Is it unavailable to them? Like what is that? Where does that advantage come from?
Well, again, I mean, perhaps from a competitive advantage, right? We are not the only firm doing competitive intelligence. I'd be naive and foolish to say that that's the case. I guess what I'm saying is that because we have the kind of data that we do, and that it's packaged in a way that is easy for our lawyers to digest, they can act on it more effectively. And so that, I think, for us is at least the different way, I believe, that we use that data. Frequently, you look at, the number of reports that you can get at a law firm is really daunting. In fact, there's too many reports. And so we really pull from such a variety of data sources to really boil down to what we consider to be the sort of like actionable nuggets. So let's say, for example, you look at a year-over-year trend of employment matters and matters going down, but fees going up. All right, that's interesting, right? We've got less matters, but more fees. Well, as you know, being in the industry as long as you have, we could have gotten hired for a matter 18 months ago, and it is just heating up now. And it could be an FLSA class action where there was not a lot of activity, and now we are focusing on class certification. Like, fees are going to go up. But if we haven't been hired, for a new matter in the last 9 months, that's probably a problem, right? Like they might think that we've got bandwidth issues because we're working on this other material matter. And so when we sort of raise that question to one of the client attorneys and say, tell us more about that, like kind of like, how could that be? And it gets us to a conversation that is not like, that is less like, give me another case, Mr. and Mrs. Client, but more like, tell me more about your docket. What are the trends happening that you have in an employment context? Are you seeing perhaps different challenges in different geographies, right? Because most clients now are not just operating in one state, they're operating across multiple states, if not the entire country. And, like California, for example, is an incredibly litigious state. Their employment laws really provide a lot of consternation for a number of employers. And so, you might look at a company that's headquartered in Tennessee, but they might have 80% of their employment cases could be in California.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I find this really interesting. Just in terms, you mentioned California, you mentioned Tennessee. So you spent, I think you said about 8 years with Minneapolis-based firms and been with Baker Donelson, which is based in Nashville. Is that fair?
We don't really have a true headquarters. I'm based in Nashville.
Right. That's kind of why I said, is that fair? Because I find that this becomes, I know David's in Jackson, right? So there's
we're everywhere, man.
So even with that said, so you've been there for about a dozen years, is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
So how much does firm culture, the location, the constituency, like how much does that influence the style of marketing and business development?
Yeah, well, I think there's a number of things that sort of play into culture, and then sort of the ultimate like activities that a firm might take into account, right? And so we are an incredibly collegial and entrepreneurial firm. Fundamentally, that helps us. that they have Baker Donelson has a tremendous amount of respect for the business professionals that help run the firm. That gives me both latitude to run my function and autonomy to run my function, but also then provides a tremendous amount of responsibility that I have to run the function. And so if they're going to sort of let me do what I need to do, both for my team and for our lawyers, it better not suck. So our initiatives better be well-founded. We better have an industry-leading website. We better be well-positioned in the media for our clients. We better outpunch our peer groups relative to market awareness. And so all those things I think are influenced by culture. And I think if, because they have been, I guess maybe like so good to me, if you will, in letting me lead, that's then led to us doing a number of industry leading programs. So like some of the things I'm describing, like I've talked to other firms and they like literally could not do it because maybe two administrative departments don't talk to one another, or because they don't even have access to a particular slice of data, or they don't purchase, some of those materials. I think one other thing that impacts that, your approach is the marketplace that you sit in, right? And so, for example, when I was in Minneapolis all those years ago, at the time, there was 21 Fortune 500 companies in Minnesota. That's a extraordinary number of Fortune 500 companies to be populated there, right? And so that then spins off, as you would imagine, a lot of legal work for a lot of law firms. And so then the approach that you take to marketing to those clients is going to be different when you've only got a handful of Fortune 500 companies, like in the state of Tennessee, for example. So in those instances, it requires a different set of tactics and approaches to try to meet those clients where they're at, because there's only so many, like HCA's, for example, which is headquartered in Minnesota and is the largest sort of corporate hospital company in the world. And so growing business from them would be similar to that of some Fortune 100 companies or 500 companies, but the tactics are sort of different for the marketplace that you're in. I don't know if that answered your question, but it kind of sort of speaks to, I think, some of the differences. And I think fundamentally culture, when you're put in a position to sort of help drive behavior and win hearts and minds, you then need to make sure that the things that you're asking people to do are well-founded.
Yeah, no, this has been super insightful, Adam. I think one of the questions that I would have is, what are some of the big future challenges that you're looking at? Like, what are the things that CMOs and CMBDOs are facing in the future? We all are talking about generative AI and all these other buzzwords, but what are the real challenges that you see people in your situation inside of large and law firms facing?
Yeah, I think there are many, Jeff. It is not for the faint of heart. I was, a lot of people say like, oh, I want a seat at the table. The seat is not always very comfortable, but I do think that some of the things that the marketplace faces, I think broadly, and we are not unique to the challenges that the marketplace faces. One is consolidation, both in our client base and in sort of law firm kind of merger environment, right? The legal talent world is much more transient than it's ever been. And you talk to a lawyer who's coming out of law school and looking to join a law firm, they will tell you kind of right to your face that they don't plan to be there in a few years. And that is a very different landscape to sort of fuel growth and sort of your experience set for a firm, right? Like it is hard to, like we're not selling Cheerios, we're selling the intellectual experience and capital of our lawyers to solve problems for big business. And so if the pieces of that puzzle are changing pretty constantly, that's sort of a big challenge for us to kind of figure out how to capture that. And then lateral movement, is continues to be a huge sort of talent management issue, again, because we sell who we are. And so if those pieces of the puzzle are moving pretty constantly, that becomes challenging. On the client consolidation front, if you look, 5 years ago, if you looked at our top 20 clients in the financial services space, 6 of those banks don't exist anymore today. In some instances, it's one client and another client getting together and hopefully 1 + 1 = 3, blah, blah, blah. And we try to sort of figure out how we can maximize our revenue potential with those clients. But that's still like big banks not there. And whether they're gobbled up by, the whole like Wachovia merger, or recently with, Truist, or, Regions Bank, or, the TD acquisition that ultimately didn't happen with First Horizon. I mean, all those things sort of put in jeopardy the market share that any given client has. And then one last thing I think that sort of keeps me maybe up at night the most is how to move the middle. Every firm that I know of is really driven by the 20% of top performers that they have, that both the revenue that they originate and the work that they provide those firms. And I think a lot of, the more that we can provide resources and make client development easy for our lawyers that are maybe not your sort of traditional rainmakers, I think is really important. Because our ability to incrementally move that population of people will result like in a really meaningful way for our firm and for other firms that can kind of get that right.
Can I jump in with another question? So I think it was last month I noticed that Baker Donelson announced a new AI team. I don't know how much traction that's had yet. I was kind of curious how that's going to work with your team, and are you doing separate things in that AI space to help?
Yeah, so we did, and we think that again, we need to be responsive to the marketplace and to figure out, we'd be putting our head in the sand if we didn't really think that AI was going to be a thing, right? I think we started this when I said I was trying to convince lawyers that the internet might be a thing. And so maybe I'm well suited to sort of lead us into this next generation, or maybe I'll get replaced by ChatGPT. The jury will be out on that. So the fundamental premise of that group right now, Joe, is to really understand the landscape, make sure that we're familiar with the tools, how they can impact companies, how they can help companies, what are some of the benefits and detriments that can occur from that. We are being very careful about how, in fact, we're really not using that for like client matters. It's more so for client education and how the client can use those tools. We're kicking it around a little bit on my team on how we might be able to use generative AI. There's a couple ways that we've looked at that. One might be in sort of versioning different descriptions for a client event for reminders. Another way that we've looked at that is how we might populate a draft of a press release. If we've got, for example, in a couple of weeks, we've got 22, summer associates starting, that's a lot of potential press releases. And so, how we use AI is something that I wouldn't say like we're full scale, like using that. It's something that we're more so investigating.
Adam, I would try to jump in here for a second because I think that Baker Donelson has about 700 lawyers across 21 offices. Is that about right?
Yep.
So what I find super interesting is as we're talking about business development beyond the 20% that are most, the biggest drivers of revenue in law firms and trying to bring everyone together, how do you balance sort of marketing as a firm-wide brand, especially as such a large organization, and yet making the marketing unique to the individual and even the branding and techniques unique to the office, because you mentioned before, your region may dictate the kind of marketing you do. So it seems quite a complex process.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I guess that I really enjoy about my work, right? Like it's intellectually interesting. And so Baker Donelson is a well-regarded firm in many, many places. We're the largest firm in the state of Tennessee. But we're only the largest firm by head count in one of those markets, and that's Memphis, Tennessee. And what I mean by that, like the number of lawyers in a market, like Baker Donelson, Memphis is the only place where we're like the largest firm. But then you go to a whole bunch of other cities, and we are in a very different spot in the marketplace. Nashville, we're the fourth largest firm in terms of headcount in Nashville, but we are 2x or 3x larger than the firms ahead of us on that list in terms of headcount. And so, there I'm trying to like coach our lawyers up to be like, we are so much bigger, better, stronger, more nimble than them in certain ways. Of course, those are fine firms. But that like we've got so much more to offer, right? But then if you think about a market like Atlanta or Houston, those are enormous markets with dare I say, much more competition. And we have, we don't have 500 lawyers in Houston, right? We've got about 25 or 30 lawyers in Houston. And so that's a good presence. And that's a good way for us to sort of continue, to look to grow. In the last 12 months, we've opened offices in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Charleston, South Carolina. And so we've sort of filled out the entire Southeast. Now, I'd like to say that we cover the SEC better than any other law firm in the country. And that's not the Securities Exchange Commission. Because if you're in the Southeast, you know exactly what the SEC is. And you'd never confuse that with those stiffs in New York. So the tactics then in each of those markets based on who you are, differ, right? So in New Orleans, there's events that we'll do for like French Quarter Fest, for example. Like there isn't even a French Quarter Fest, in Nashville. There's a CMA Fest, but if you talk to the folks in Nashville, of the things we're ever going to do, it's not a CMA Fest event, right? And so, because that is a very touristy thing, that's not like kind of a local jam. People just converge from all over the world to listen to country music, which is like a fun weekend, but it's not something that we use to sort of drive our client development strategy. But one thing I think, Ari, that sometimes people get confused by is that no matter what market you're in the world, and I don't care if you are, Skadden or Cravath and the fanciest firm, in any given market, any firm that is going to have staying presence requires marketplace activity. Like your lawyers need to be hustling in the marketplace and talking to decision makers and influencers that impact the purchasing of legal services. They just have to be out there. They cannot wait for the phone to ring. And it doesn't matter if you've got 3 lawyers in an office or 300 lawyers in an office. You really need to have that activity. So it is a little bit of a balance, right? Because, while some of our offices are smaller in nature, a lot of the challenges that they face are exactly the same. It's just sort of a magnitude issue.
I move Rainmaker partners, and they're always looking for a better platform, a way to increase their business. Are you using?
If they're awesome, they should come to Baker Donelson. I'm sorry.
Yes, definitely. And I'll come and see you guys in Memphis. That's a fun town to visit. But I was just wondering if you're using any of the data to track cross-selling and cross-marketing activity, because that's a big hot button issue for the people I'm working with. Like, if you can reward that cross-selling activity, you get a lot more of it. It has to be rewarded with money usually to get people to do it consistently.
Yeah, people don't like to be paid with hugs, right?
Yeah.
We do. One of the things that I had mentioned before you got on, Jen, was we've got some client-specific reports that allow us to understand practice group penetration at a client level. We also have a lot of, reports that look at imports and exports from offices as well as practices. Much of what we do in integrating lateral attorneys is really building out their 100-day plan. How we then look to sort of place, for lack of a better term, those individuals with the appropriate skill sets into some of our client teams and our firm growth targets to make sure that they're getting plugged into some of those sort of existing firm assets. And then similarly, we look to try to plug in colleagues that are already here into the assets, hopefully that a new lateral would be bringing.
I hate to belabor the point, but it seems like for cross-selling purposes, I might be a nice person and Ari asks me to go to a lunch with him and pitch, and I'll do that. But I don't know if I'll fly to California for it, or I'll go to a 3-day conference, or I'll go to lunch 20 times this month, unless I get something out of it in some way. So there are some firms that are awarding origination credit by matter instead of by client. Some firms have a bonus pool for cross-selling activities. Some firms make it part of the compensation formula and they actually award a score for it. Are you doing something that puts it into numbers or a formula that people understand?
I believe we do. We have, one of the more generous, might not be the appropriate word, but I think the technical ability for our lawyers to share credit on a matter basis is down to the percentage point. And that I know is rare. And so it is an expectation typically that if you're going to come along and we're scoring new work, that we're going to, I like one of my mantras is sharing is caring. And so that comes down to credit too, and I think, we want people to get on airplanes and go visit clients in California. And our CEO talks about it. I talk about it. In fact, I was in Atlanta just yesterday. And it's a lot of what we talked about was making sure that people are collaboratively selling the firm, because that's what clients want. Clients want to see teams of people. They don't want to see, this is not like we hung out at the country club marketplace anymore. And so we need to make sure that we're bringing teams of people. And so if we don't do that and don't reward that behavior as well, we do not have like a score of like how good of a business developer somebody is. I feel like of the hills I'd like to die on, like who am I to give somebody a score like that? They may be doing things that like they're just not telling me about, right? And so they could be doing like all the best activities, but if they don't input it into our CRM database, like the way that's going to bear out is in their originations and in their client dollars, and the way in which people sort of get those fees. And so I get pretty skittish about the idea that I'd be starting to like grade our attorneys that might then yield them a bonus. My preference would be to provide infrastructure, support, and resources to make client development easy for our lawyers, and then to really make it sort of in a way that they'd be excited about going on a client meeting more so than seeing it as a chore.
Sounds like that works pretty well.
We think so.
So we've had a bunch of conversations about James Clear's Atomic Habits. I don't know if you've read that book or heard of that book, right? So I've become obsessed with these concepts, but the idea of this sort of chipping away is like a mantra that I live by, but he talks a lot about this idea of small steps that lead to a real result. Because you mentioned, if someone doesn't enter something into the CRM, but if they're kind of chipping away, making a call every day, posting something to LinkedIn, whatever activity, might be most effective for them. Have you seen it, either for different generations, different practices, different people in different offices? Because I used to coach all the new partners for many years for one of the big firms, and they were all over the place, like in your firm. And, one of my lawyers in wherever in Columbia, South Carolina, was doing something very different than the lawyers in Los Angeles. And so are there activities that you have found or maybe work universally that you would suggest? And then are there things that you've found that be oddly unique to a certain practice or jurisdiction?
You're probably familiar with the concept of leading indicators and lagging indicators. Law firms are really, really good at navel gazing and looking at lagging indicators. They're really good at looking at reports based on precedent of what happened last month, last year, and everything else. The number one leading indicator in my 25 years is to go do a client visit. If you go see your client, good things will happen, and that will ultimately, more times than not, lead to new opportunities for you and for your law firm. And so fundamentally, the number one thing that I recommend our lawyers do, and if you wanted to poll all of my team members that happen to join this call, they will say I should probably have like client visits tattooed on my arm, for crying out loud. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to launch our next client visit challenge. And we have a scoreboard and we give prizes, and you get more points, Jennifer, if you bring a colleague with you for that particular challenge. So client visits, everybody should do client visits, no matter what, period, hard stop. More broadly than that, though, there's a whole host of things that you can do, and it really ebbs and flows based on sort of where you are in your career trajectory, who you've got in your network, and what your practice is. But sometimes you can't hide, though, from client visits, right? So we got a lot of people who love LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a great resource. If LinkedIn is your only strategy to generate client work, you're probably not going to be a big rainmaker. You might like land some cool stuff because you reposted someone else's article and added a sentence, and maybe that made you look smart. But the challenge becomes, if you are not having meaningful interactions with clients, they're not going to know, like, and trust you, which are sort of the three barriers to entry to securing new engagements. Authoring articles is obviously a very good thing for people to do. I've got some of my lawyers, though, like I tell them to stop writing articles because they're managing millions of dollars worth of business. They need to tend to the care and feeding of their clients. But other lawyers, it works well because they're still trying to gain market awareness and have people like know that they've got a skill set, really jives with them. And so there's a number of things that you can do to sort of accomplish that. But again, client visits, number one, hard stop. mic drop.
So I just had this conversation this morning because the ILTA conference is coming up, and I had a conversation with a colleague of mine. We're both going to be there, and we were talking about scheduling time, and I'm obsessive about this. We've had lots of conversations about like, hey, shaking hands, having a face-to-face, even if you're doing 30-minute meetings all day for 4 days straight and you're exhausted. And so she was saying how she hasn't planned things. She's thinking maybe she's going to be a little bit more. And I was like, no, you want to see the people you want to see. You want to smile. You want to hear a story. You want to shake a hand, and you want to like just get up early and go to bed late. It was just this very, so that and that really, really resonates with me. I have to say that Adam, it's so generous of you to join today, but I'm always so fascinated by the virtual lunch because this is, as I said, we've done over 850 virtual lunches, and I feel like this is one of the best ones. Like this advice.
I mean, what the hell took you so long to invite me?
Hey, I'm saying it's my fault. It's totally my fault. But it's just like I'm just thinking. I'm sitting here. I'm like, this is such a great conversation, and we've been doing this so long. So anyway, does anybody else have any questions? I have a final question or so, but I just want to see if anybody else has something they want to ask before we go. Oh, Scott, yes.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment. Law firms don't take advantage of their staff. Their staff is filled with contacts, and some of them could be clients. And they should take advantage of that. And they need to figure out how to reward those people, even if it doesn't lead to a case, if it leads to somebody who could refer a case. Right. And the other thing that lawyers need to do is they need to not only visit their clients, they need to visit the people who refer them business. And those people might not be clients, they might be other lawyers, whatever. And don't just send them a bottle of wine every year, All
right. So Adam, with that in mind, for the last point here, so you mentioned visiting folks, and client visits, all of those things resonate with all of us. Are there skills that lawyers should develop, the cold call, the, getting out of their comfort zone, like those you've seen over all these years who are the strongest in marketing and business development, whether they're the 20% you said who tend to drive a lot of the revenue, what are those skills? What are those tactics? And, can people learn them?
Yeah. So I think, and I believe I alluded to it before, but, fundamentally, every client is different, and even individuals within the same entity are different. And so if you can be hyper-focused on having a one-size-fits-one approach to your client development, you will be successful. And so you could represent General Motors, and the way you would approach Craig Glidden, the general counsel of that entity, who's like probably one of the more famous lawyers in the world, is going to be very different than the way you approach the deputy general counsel, maybe one of their staff attorneys, maybe somebody who's in a legal operations role. And it's not that you would treat them like with less respect, but like the way they like to be marketed to, the kinds of things that they want to have access to, the introductions that you might provide them. And so the people that are really good at client development, they develop relationship maps for a given company. They then figure out how to sort of weed and sort of work through like, oh, wow, I'm probably not the right person that's going to jive well with that personality. Why don't I bring a colleague to the table, because she's going to actually maximize that relationship for the betterment of the firm in a much more way. And so when you start to do that, you then inherently give trust to your colleagues. And when you give trust, the results can be pretty remarkable.
Adam Severson, everybody. What a wonderful conversation. Adam, thank you so much for your generosity. Thanks, of course, to our friends at UniCourt for supporting this series on fueling firm growth. I hope everyone has a great weekend. I feel so privileged that we had this discussion. Thank you.